just a little past 5:30. I'll call tonight's EDA meeting to order. And Dan, could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Grindal. Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Hoyt.
Here.
Commissioner Lorge.
Here.
Commissioner Husnick.
Here.
And President Bain.
Here. I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Members of the EDA, we have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve or any changes.
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries. Our next item this evening is to approve the minutes from our regular meeting of February 13th, 2023. It has been a while with our workshops and our canceled meetings since we've met, so we've got a couple of minutes to catch up on here. I will entertain a motion or any changes to the minutes for February 13th.
I move we accept February 13th minutes.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And minutes approved. And our next item is the minutes from our regular meeting of March 13th, 2023. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for the regular meeting of March 13th, 2023.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? And motion passes. All right, brings us to, we have a couple of discussion topics this evening, and the first is Headwaters 123 overview and a concept plating update. I think this is the first time with our new EDA that we've discussed this topic, and so Dan is going to give us a little bit of a background on this project, on this parcel, what we've done so far, and then has some discussion points specific around concept plating. Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
President, members of the EDA, tonight really kind of have two presentations. I'll go through the history, sort of the market conditions, kind of how we got to where we are today. I'll stop at that point, ask any questions. If you have any questions on the presentation so far, there'll be an opportunity there. And then we'll go into the concept plating, so kind of breaking it up into two sections. However, at any point, if anybody has any questions on the parcel, any questions on the presentation, feel free just to stop me, jump in at that point. You don't need to hold them until the end, but if you prefer to wait till the end, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So a little bit of an overview on the Headwaters parcel. For you, those of you that don't know, this parcel is located just south of town, just south of the Forest Lake YMCA, Washington County Service Center, Hardwater Creek Library. It is city-owned. It's 123 acres. It's actually two parcels. For some reason, this little wooded section down here is a separate parcel, but all of it's city-owned. It's currently zoned a business park. It got rezoned in 2020. Previous to that, I think it was residential, but we did rezone that in 2020 to business park, which is in alignment with how we're marketing the property currently. A little bit of history on the site. So in 2014, the idea of bringing residential development to the EDA to develop this parcel for residential development was brought to the EDA. At that time, the lot supply in the city was fairly low. We were basically running out of lots within the city. So we brought the idea of, do we want to develop this in terms of housing? The EDA at the time was not supportive of residential development. We did not want to compete with the private market at that point. We said, let the private market bring the residential development in. Let's hold this use for higher and better use. A job center for the city was an example that got brought up. Fast forward a couple of years, we submitted this site as a part of a request for information that came in. This site did score favorably on that initial RFI. If I recall, I think there was 3 sites within the state of Minnesota that the team that was actually bringing the project to the state of Minnesota visited. We were one of them, so we kind of got through all of the initial clearances, actually entertained site visits at that point. Based on those favorable RFI results, we did bring the discussion about data centers started to begin at the EDA. We started looking at, if it, on a national selector, if we started to rank and became a site that actually came out and visited, does this site have those characteristics that developers are looking for when they're looking to site data centers. So work did begin on exploring that particular market segment for this parcel. I do want to mention that sort of the approach to site development that we've had for this particular parcel has been, number one, is make this a job center for the city, is look at those uses that'll bring jobs and tax base to the city of Forest Lake. We've also really taken a very methodical and data-driven approach to this, looking at does the numbers, does the data behind it support the market position that we're currently in? Using that sort of more methodical approach is what we've been doing to date. And then also have worked to identify those high-value and evergreen studies. So when we make investments on this parcel from a study standpoint, that those studies apply not just to data center or technology, they apply to basically any type of development that would happen. Again, trying to keep us in as many market segments as possible as we look to develop this site. You'll hear me a lot tonight say about data centers, and when I say data centers, that is probably a little bit of a misnomer. We are in multiple market segments for this particular parcel, but we did really start out focusing on data centers. Back in 2018, the data center market was kind of the darling of the industry. A lot of people were looking at exploring data center setups. They were sort of the hot topic at real estate summits. So you'll hear me talk about data centers a little bit out of force of habit, but we are in multiple market segments. Data centers kind of break down into two subcategories, the single user or the hyperscale data center and the co-location data center. Single user data center are the big players in the industry. They're typically the Facebooks, the Metas, the Googles, the Amazons. They're the ones that will build a data center. All of the servers in there go to support that operation. So it's basically Amazon server farm that's in there, only supporting Amazon services. A co-location data center is one where a private party comes in, puts the panel up, and then the server space is rented out to a multitude of companies. So you might see 100, 200, 300 businesses that use that data center for their data pipeline. Both have slightly different use requirements because co-locations are typically a little bit smaller than a hyperscale user, but there are multiple market segments within the data center world. I also mentioned that we're in other market segments. Another one that we've been in is the high-tech manufacturing. A new phenomenon that's just starting to come out is companies are now taking large-scale 3D printers and using that to print on demand for parts. So there's an auto manufacturer that's actually printing cars. They get the parts, they print them themselves and assemble right there. So those type of high-tech manufacturers typically require a lot of fiber capacity because the CAD files they use are large files, and they need to have that access to fiber to do that high-tech manufacturing. We've also looked at warehousing or logistics for this site as well. And then also explored in the segment for medical, such as like remote radiology, where companies go out, real hospitals will send their radiology, as an example, to these centers. The radiologist reads the file and sends it back, sends the results back. So there's a lot of other market segments that do require similar setups as data centers, but have different end uses. So we have been exploring all those different various market segments as we've gone through this process. Now, from a data center development or technology center development standpoint, there's a lot of strict criteria, which I'll get into on the next slide, that makes sites eligible for development. But one thing that we're seeing here in the state of Minnesota that's helping to bring a business from data center technology to the state is that the state of Minnesota has an incentive program that allows for, and I believe it's the taxes associated with the purchase of like the server, the technology for the building to be reimbursed. So not only on initial build, but also as you do refreshes. So there's an ongoing incentive for businesses to site here because they're getting that tax break at the state level. It has nothing to do locally. That's a state incentive that Minnesota does offer. And then when you dive into data center development, they do typically develop on various lot sizes. They can go from small sites all the way up to large sites, which is what the Headwaters 123 is classified as. A few of those characteristics that data centers or technology companies need is they typically need redundant power. So they need multiple power sources for their building. Reason being is they want to make sure that if one source goes down, they have a backup source that immediately can supply that. A lot of these data centers need as close to 100% uptime as possible. So that's why they have that need for redundant power. They're also looking for utilities that are adjacent to the site or available. Headwaters 123 does have utilities site adjacent in its current condition. They also look for robust fiber capacity. They want to make sure that they have the fiber pipeline that's there. They either can be dark fiber, which is only their data gets transmitted on it, or they have multiple fiber providers. So if one fiber gets cut, they can ensure that they can still get their data transmitted out. This site does have multiple fiber, robust fiber capacity is available to the site. They also want to make sure it's a low-risk site. What I mean by this, they want to make sure it's not sited next to a fault line or it's in a tornado alley. They want to make sure the environmental concerns are relatively stable. Minnesota is relatively stable weather conditions, so from an environmental standpoint, this does score well as a low-risk site. And then also, one characteristic that this site has compared to a lot of other sites that are in the market is that this is a large parcel. There are getting to be fewer and fewer 100-plus acre sites in the metro area, and every year they become less and less, so this site does start to really sort of exist in a rarer market segment with that large parcel. And then it's also single ownership, so if they're looking for that large parcel, they don't have to go to multiple providers or multiple owners to try to assemble or patch together their project. So some of the work that we've done to date, in 2018, we started working with the partnering agencies in establishing the Minnesota Technology Corridor. I will go into a little bit more detail on the next slide of what the corridor is, but we were there on the onset of the start of the Minnesota Technology Corridor. We also partnered with both Connexus Energy and Washington County CDA to start doing some initial pre-planning or some site planning on this parcel. We had a drone LiDAR mapping completed where we flew a drone over the top of the parcel to get some survey work done so we can have this really nice 3D model of the site. We completed a phase 1 environmental and a wetland mapping of the site. I do want to stress that these studies that we did, they were partially funded, or when Connexus fully funded the drone LiDAR, Washington County was 80% funded of the phase 1 and the wetland mapping. But all of these studies apply not only to data centers, but they'll apply to any type of development that goes in. So again, that wide market segment. We also did site scoring using Great River Energy criteria for the site. What this was a tabletop exercise. Great River Energy has partnered with Deloitte Consulting to develop sort of I would call it a shovel-ready program for data centers. It's sort of the questions that site selectors look for when they're siting a data center. And we ran it through that tabletop exercise to see if there was any sort of poison pill in the mix that would prevent us from actually landing a project. This property did score extremely well on that tabletop exercise, and our consultant with GRE said, I don't see any major issues that would prevent you from landing a site here. So kind of taking all that background information, we did list this site with CBRE. We listed it at the time with their data center specialist. They had a broker that specialized in landing data centers, who worked with, on a national level with site selectors all over the country. So we cited with CBRE to get that local, regional, and national presence for this particular parcel. And going back to the technology corridor, partnering with the technology corridor also helped us to get national exposure for this particular parcel. So in essence, what the technology corridor is, it's private-public partnerships. There's 5 cities involved. It's Forest Lake, Columbus, Hugo, Centerville, and Lino Lakes. It's also Anoka County and Washington County. We all work together to try to bring a technology or a data center to this region or to this area. We also have private sector businesses that are involved as well. I know we have Connexus Energy, Excel Energy, Zayo Fiber, I think Arvig Fiber is there as well. And there are other private partners that also come to the table, come to the meetings, and we can, through those meetings, have been able to really address some of those issues that may come up with a site selector and work to get answers to those questions before those questions are asked. The corridor also helps us to get national market exposure. The corridor has sponsored some ads in national site selectors magazines. I believe they've also attended some national site selector conferences as well. So we're starting to get that national market exposure for data and for the region here. And our efforts to date actually helped land the Amazon site in Centerville. So some of the work that the technology corridor did, Amazon is putting a distribution center in Centerville. A lot of that work that Centerville did as part of their partnership in the technology corridor helped to get that project there. So we are starting to see some results from the technology corridor partnerships. So what has been the market response? It's one thing to kind of plan for the market, but what's the market response been to date? So on request for information, I think since probably late 2020, the site has been submitted as part of 4 formal requests for informations that we get. Now, requests for informations kind of go in stages. They kind of go with a very general, then they want to get more specific and more specific and more specific. Of those 4 RFIs that we submitted to, 3 of which have generated follow-up requests. So we've already sort of gone through that first gate, and now they're starting to ask some more drill-down questions on those. So we're starting to see a little bit of traction on those RFIs that have come in. We also spent the better part of 2021 and 2022 under a letter of intent with a national developer. So we had a large national developer come, wanted to take a look and purchase the whole property. But as part of that purchase, they really wanted to do their own due diligence on the parcel and really see, is it a good fit for their project, and put the project under the property under a letter of intent to purchase, which had we passed our due diligence period, the next step in that would have been a purchase agreement and a project. So we were close on that LOI, so we did spend quite a bit of time under an LOI with that project. We weren't selected. However, the national developer at the end of that process told our broker that they were very impressed with the city's response to the questions that they had on the project, and also our willingness to work and kind of problem solve with the team. So it really helped to raise our level of our awareness on that national developer marketplace. In 2023, we have a new broker now. The former broker has no longer with CBRE, so now we're with a new broker that's got a little bit broader market experience. He's more in sort of I'd call him a little bit more of a jack of all trades when it comes to development, not specifically targeted data centers, but also has done commercial development, retail development, so a little bit of a broader expertise. So we do have a new broker for the site for 2023. And we've also just met with a national site selector. So a national site selector flew out, came here, and actually was looking at data centers within the region on a very large parcel of land. We did let them know about the Headwater parcel and had that national one-on-one meeting with a national selector. So we are starting to see some market response, or have had good market response to this parcel. The current market conditions, this is sort of me grabbing a little bit of a crystal ball, trying to see where the market's going to go here. So, take this with a grain of salt. But everybody right now is sort of trying to determine what is the impact of the slowing economy and rising interest rates. So I think everybody that I've talked to at real estate development conferences and at the meetings, there's still projects that are getting done. They're just kind of going through a little bit slower process to get across the starting line. There's a little bit of trepidation in terms of just gung-ho getting projects started. I think everybody right now is really kind of wanting to see where the economy and the interest rates are going before they commit to projects. But there are projects that are still getting started at this point. That being said, looking at the market demand for data centers, it's still showing pretty decent moderate growth for the next 10 years. I think they're showing about 10% growth in the next 10 years. So I mean, it still has some pretty decent growth. It's a pretty decent growth segment of the economy. But one thing that we are seeing here, particularly with the Headwater site in Minnesota in general, is that for these big users, there's some load limit capacity, how much power can be provided, and the ramp-up time to get those transmission lines and those substations built is being delayed because of supply chain issues. So what wasn't an issue before to get transformers pre-COVID, now there could be a 24-month, 36-month lead time, which is changing some dynamics in terms of when these projects go or where these projects are being placed. The site does continue to generate market interest. We still are getting calls on it, I would say relatively frequently. Comparative to back in, when we first started with this in 2018, 2017, they were few and far between. We're starting to kind of still see consistent, requests come in or, interest in the site. Again, as I said before, we are open to other uses. We're not specifically or exclusively in data at this point. We are starting to get that out into those other uses as well and get that knowing that and it can be a small change from being a technology park to a business park on the brochure, can help kind of make other selectors more comfortable with, it's a business park, I'm more familiar with that, which can kind of help to expand those other uses. And one thing that's going to come down the pipeline too is also looking at, do we want to keep this site together or look at the possible of subdividing it as projects come in to fit that market segment? Because it's also, while there's less 100+ acre sites in the metro area, there are also fewer users who are gonna be placed on a 100-plus acre site because it's a larger site. So it's sort of, that question is gonna come up at some point is, are we gonna have to subdivide this out to make that development happen on that site? That's basically the history to date. I just kind of want to pause here for any questions anybody has on how we got to where we are. What you see on your screen here, this actually is a LiDAR imagery that was flown. So this is the result of that multi-vista study. And this has been presented to a lot of site selectors as well who've used it to sort of do some kind of pre-planning on the sites. But right now, happy to answer any questions EDA may have regarding the history of the site.
Dan, did you mention, I don't know if you mentioned how we acquired the site?
I did not. I think we got it back through, I don't exactly remember.
I think I can tell
Is
you.
it part of the airport?
Yep.
It was part of the airport.
Yep, it was all part of that acquisition back in about 97 or something like that. It was a 640 acre piece there total, which included the airport.
Thanks for the save there, Sam. Thanks for the save. I couldn't remember exactly how the city acquired
We
it.
do history by committee. It's good. That's okay. Questions for Dan?
I'm new to this. I'm just curious, what type of interest have you seen so far from companies or whatever? What are they looking at? What type of businesses are drawing so far that have shown an interest in the property?
It's been, the RFIs we've responded to have sort of been, I'd say, a potpourri. A lot of it's been manufacturing. A lot of it's been sort of those, they come in, they're very sort of generic statements. They'll say a high-tech manufacturing firm is looking for 60-plus acres, and they have sort of the requirements. But there's been a lot of manufacturing firms that have looked at it. Some logistics companies looking for warehousing. That's been another market segment that we've been in. But the warehousing market segment, up until this year, again, it's sort of replaced data centers. It's sort of like they could not build warehousing. The market was just throwing warehousing up everywhere across the metro area. So it was a very hot market segment. We did see a lot of interest at that point in warehousing as well. Data centers has always been sort of, it's been there, and it's been sort of, that's probably the most consistent mark that we've get, but that's also probably where a lot of our marketing efforts have been and a lot of the expertise for the site has been. So it sort of makes sense that we're gonna see a data center there. I do want to let the EDA know that data centers typically, from a job perspective, they're not employing hundreds of people. They typically are relatively low employed, but those employees that are there are very well compensated. They're highly compensated employees that are there. But there is some secondary benefit to the labor market when the fact that those data centers do require HVAC, electrical work, so there's some contractor benefit as well by having them there. But from a straight employer standpoint, they're not bringing in 100 jobs. A typical data center may have anywhere between 10 and 25 positions that are there after construction kind of comes through. But they do offer good tax incentive. They are high-value buildings that are there, so they do offer a good tax base for the city.
Thank you.
Are most data centers, I mean, post-pandemic, a lot of those positions gone remote?
I think data centers still require technicians to be in to make sure everything's running. So I haven't heard like data centers going fully remote. I think there's some probably remote operations that happen, but I still think that a lot of those employees are still coming in on a daily basis, at least from the articles I've read on sort of impact to the data center sector.
I was reading, in terms of, like broadening the scope to say business park, I guess this isn't a question, go so ahead, if we're, just looking for feedback, but I think that would be wise to be a little bit more inclusive, and open to potentially subdivide. I was curious, who was, or what segment was the LOI, what organization was?
The LOI was for for a warehousing company. So it was a large warehousing project that was actually looking to site up in the northern metro. So we're still seeing, I would say warehousing is that industrial use, it's cooled off slightly, and some people have scaled back some of their projects metro-wide. But it could also be a market that potentially, you're starting to see some of these things in terms of all market segments that kind of go up and down, but that could be one that comes back too.
But I was doing a little research today too, and and I'm not, I'm no commercial real estate expert by any means, that's not my lane, but just with,
consumer spending, e-commerce, that is sort of an area that I'm in, but I don't see that slowing down in terms of, you know, the need for warehousing and distribution. And so from what I was reading and seeing, it seemed like the demand was still growing. And so, and maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm seeing that, but I see that as a huge opportunity. I mean, I guess the Amazon in Centerville is a huge queue also, but, you know, whether it's Home Depot, Walmart, Amazon, you know, everyone, if they want it, whether it's groceries, they need to be online deliveries. So I feel like, you know, if it's not, you know, a data center, that warehousing seems to be, and land is short in terms of getting warehousing space and having the space for them to have the trailers to be able to park and ready to go to fulfill. And we're close to the 35 corridor. So, I mean, I just feel like that might be an opportunity to explore.
And one of the challenges with that particular site was that this site, and you'll see on the concept plots in the next slides, that there's a Metropolitan Council interceptor line that runs down the middle of the property, which if you're looking to build a very, very large distribution center, that's an issue because you're building over a sewer line. So we were looking at potentially having to relocate that line, which may lead to the next part. It may be better at some point to split these into two smaller segments that allows that line to sort of exist in its current state. But the industrial and the warehousing segment, to your point, I mean, it's one of those things where that has been, and when we went to the industrial conference at Real Estate Journal, you were starting to see just a little bit of pullback from there because some of that stuff that was being constructed was constructed on spec. So some companies will go out there and build so many square feet of industrial space. Hopefully they can find the end user. So some of that you're starting to see maybe a little bit less build on spec and build only when the contract is there. They have an end user for it. So again, all of these market segments have multiple micro segments within the market, and it depends on who you talk to, that some markets are up and some segments are down. But we're trying to position this in as many of those segments as possible so we can get something to land out here.
One of the things I think that just will need to be managed as we consider that if that answer is distribution is, it's not, from that exact site, direct access to the freeway is a little less than ideal. There's either having to do 61 or Fenway, or there's schools close to that area and residential, and now we've got, multifamily, like, higher density residential. So there is some thought that we'll have to give to what does that traffic flow look like, and that's something that we just know is a fact of that site, and one of the reasons why maybe a data center or something that was a little bit less traffic intensive was attractive, but any option's going to have pros and cons. So,
and I think to the proximity to the neighborhood conversation is that if you look at the big industrial complexes that were just built in Cottage Grove, they had a lot of, I can't remember how many square feet they just added in 22. Their locations, if you look at them from a map, now just as anecdotal, just from a map perspective, were very kind of similar to what the Headwaters parcel was in adjacency to neighborhoods. So they were sort of in a kind of a similar configuration where the neighborhoods weren't on the way near side of the city. They were sort of adjacent to it. So I mean, there is some opportunity for that those sites do, will land even if there's neighborhoods adjacent to it. But they do increase traffic counts quite a bit when you're bringing in distribution.
But I think the whole idea is we'd entertain any proposal that would come along, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Look at it and see what possibilities we have out there and
Right.
what we can do about traffic if that became an issue and that sort of thing. I don't think we're opposed to doing, just keeping it, or opposed to splitting it up if we have to. In fact, in some cases, it probably would make sense, but let's keep our options open.
Any other questions on sort of how we got here before I kind of go into the site, the concept plotting that we did for this site?
yes, I think so.
So the concept planning, this was done, there's two reasons why we did concept planning. Was number one, our former broker, we asked him sort of what's the missing piece from a marketing perspective for this parcel. If we're gonna do one more type of study for it, what do you recommend? The recommendation came back and says do some concept planning to allow for selectors to sort of visualize how they could break this parcel down into smaller parcels. What's being presented tonight is not necessarily something that we're looking for approvals on. These are just similar concepts that we can bring to market to say, here are some options for how this can break down. Anything that's presented tonight would still have to go through the full review process, would still have to go through the full, planning commission review, council review, everything before it gets finalized. But these are just some high-level options for what potentially could fit on the site. Concept number one, so what Bruce from Talali did here was, for all of these sites that he did, he tried to incorporate as much of the natural conditions on the site as possible. So try to use the natural features of the site to build these concepts out. So what concept number one here has is that the primary entrance point is from Headwaters Parkway and Forest Road alignment. So you come down north to south. There's a secondary exit or entry off of Fenway on the southern border of the property, which is roughly in alignment with where 195th is further to the west, to the west. Again, natural amenities are there to try to create that development framework. And there's a linear stormwater basin that runs from the north to the south. And then the berms are there to try to contain those views for this particular site. And you'll see here on this screen, you'll see the dots that run north to south. That is the interceptor line that's currently in its current location, rough location of that interceptor line.
Just pause, just context, that interceptor line is like the sewer line that carries our sewage south, so it's major infrastructure component. I didn't know what an interceptor line was when I first sat in this seat, so just, if anyone's wondering, what is that? It is the primary sewer line that carries everything from Forest Lake south.
So what we have here from a data center camp, if you're to split this into two data center campuses or two sites, is that using that configuration, you're basically going to get approximately about a 28-acre west campus and a 17-acre east campus out of that. That allows for access off of Forest Road, as well as that new road to the south. Again, from a data center or from a technology standpoint, a lot of these companies don't want to draw attention to themselves. They sort of want to be hidden on the property. This uses those natural features to accomplish that sort of shielding and kind of hiding themselves from the neighboring uses. To further split this one down, if you wanted to create this into smaller lots for more of a job center, this does offer you approximately 8 lots, ranging from 3 acres to 8 acres in size. Again, natural systems are there to create those signature entrances to the lots. Lot 4 does have an entrance off of Fitzgerald Trail.
Is that going from the 123 though? So is the like, when you had that previous slide that just had the 2, is the difference just what's taken up by those natural buffers?
Yeah,
That's
so
a lot.
there's a lot that's taken up by the buffers and the stormwater on site. So yeah, that's why you see these shrink down pretty substantially when you start looking at these concepts. So the job center site, you're looking at like those smaller sites anywhere between 3 and 7 acres, or 3 and 8 acres, excuse me. Those could be combined. So if somebody's looking for a 15-acre site, they could combine the 8 and the 7 to create a single 15-acre site. But this does allow for more end users to be present on the site if we go with this job center model as an option. Concept number 2 still maintains those natural entrance points, those natural barriers that are there. But what it does is it moves that southern road to about the midpoint in the property. So it's about transects about midway through is where that east-west connector goes. And it still accesses off of Forest Road and Fitzgerald north to south. Going here from a data center standpoint, you have 4 sites that are option. You have a 15-acre, a 16-acre, a 7, and an 11 on this one. And again, all the natural features are preserved. And then from a job center perspective, you have 7 lots on this one. These ones are a little bit bigger. These ones are more on the 6 or 5 to 8 acre sites, so a little bit larger sites that are here on this one. So that's a couple of the concepts that Bruce presented. What's nice about these is that when you go meet with a selector that's maybe looking for that 25-acre site, they see 123, they kind of want to know how it's going to break down. You can hand them this and say, here's a concept that takes into the current state of the land where it's not just drawn on a napkin, there's actual thought and research behind this, so they can start to see how their project could fit on the site, which again keeps you in conversations with the selectors longer and keeps you at the table longer, which is always the goal when you're meeting and trying to get a project to land. So don't really need any like formal action. This is just more for an awareness standpoint that we are starting to kind of go through this, the possibility of this site needing to get broken down. But it's really gonna probably be what project comes forward first. Is it a 123 user, is it a 50 acre user, 25 acre user? You know, that kind of starts to drive those next step conversations. My recommendation, you know, would be don't, on a 7 acre user, don't go through a full concept plating just for one single user. It's like you wanna try to get some multiple users in there, because what'll happen here is if you have one user in there and you go through this concept, you have 7 other lots that you now have to sell. So there's always that in the back of your mind too. So it's sort of a balancing act on everything. But we're at least now being able to go to the site selectors and say, if you need smaller sites, here's a couple of options for you, which again, the market does respond well to. So that, any questions on the concepts that were presented?
You mind flipping back? Do all of the concepts still have the interceptor line running straight down the middle?
They do.
Because we've talked about potential, and I think one of the projects had us actually sitting down with Met Council to talk about moving that. Is that still, or do you want to talk about, is it worth?
We've
kind of
had a
an
meeting with
update
Met,
on-
we had a meeting with Met Council, I don't know, last year sometime, and talked about, can we move it, when we had one of the proposals in front of us. They would be willing to move it at a cost of $2 million. It's
$2 million?
$2 million. It's a 36-inch main line. It takes Columbus, it takes Forest Lake. There is some
The
movement.
terminal, are we the end of it, or does it, we
Yeah,
are the end?
we're the end of it.
Okay. Or the
We are
beginning?
in constant contact with Met Council. Actually, I met with our area representative last week and brought this particular subject up with her and asking if the Met Council is going to look at this more closely in the future, because when they did their televising of that, the portion in Forest Lake was in good shape, but the portion south of that was not as good shape. And they have a rotating maintenance and replacement schedule. So we just wanted to keep that in front of them. If they're gonna move it, we would like to get together with them as soon as possible, and move it as soon as possible. If it were to be moved, it would be moved down to Fenway, go to the west, and take Fenway's all the way down to the end of the city's borders. So it would take it out of any individual properties. But who knows when that, and if that's gonna happen.
Understood.
It comes down Forest Boulevard for a ways. Where does it cross over there?
You know where it crosses over, right?
The old gravel road, 202nd,
Oh, it does?
and then it cuts, once it gets past the trees, then it heads south again.
Okay,
Where the, left field of the baseball field is.
yeah, so that track that's just on the south side of the airport, on the airport property, that's 202nd.
That old gravel road, it
Yeah.
runs right down the middle of that.
Okay,
Forest Road down to that, and then it goes south to these dots.
And it's 36 inches?
36-inch main.
Go tubing in it.
No, thank you.
You first.
Other questions about the plat concepts?
the other part of this concept though, Dan, or Patrick too, we could have a street over the top of that.
Yeah,
Right?
the Met Council is open to a lot of things except putting a building over the top of their sewer.
Yeah,
They really wouldn't like that too much, and they probably would never allow anything to go over the top of that sewer, so.
but a street would be okay.
Street would be
Yeah.
okay. Street because you could tear it up, but it'd have to be pretty wide street because it would need a lot of room on both sides to repair a 36-inch main, so.
How deep is that thing?
It varies, up at Forest Road, it's shallow, about 12 feet, because that's where, you know, they just start with their lift station,
Mm-hmm.
and then through here, it's probably 15 to 20 feet.
Wow.
Depending on the topography of the soils.
Yeah. I was thinking it might have been deeper than that, but not sure.
There's a lot of variation in the topography of the land. Just even on this 123 here, the grade from east to west, it's pretty significant.
All right.
Other questions or feedback on the plating? Dan, you don't need any action for us tonight. So is it, so that plating is as done as, we've kind of taken it as far as we're going to take it without having a more specific project with more specific requirements, is that right?
Yeah, correct. So how these get utilized, so I don't know if, 2018, the EDA, we did a study on, there's a property south of 97. We did some concept planning there as well to evaluate the purchase of that property and see if we want to develop it as a business park. Those concept plans were done. They kind of got set in a corner. Well, a site selector was looking to purchase that property, so we sent him over the plans that were done so he could get a jump start on the possibility of subdividing that out. That's similar to what this would be. Somebody comes in, how can this possibly be broken down? It really gives them they can hit the ground running with it. So these basically become a very nice marketing piece for the property for those that are looking for smaller users, which the previous agent or the broker for the site had always commented it's either going to be the full site or it's going to be a split. So by having you in both sections, it just really kind of helps keep those conversations going.
All right, any other questions? All right, great background, Dan, thank you. Should we move on to shoreline study update?
President, members of the EDA, I want to give an update on the shoreline study that was approved here by the EDA back in February. A lot of the work to date has been done on the downtown transient dock, so that was sort of step one. For those on the EDA that don't know, part of the downtown plan was looking at trying to expand the downtown transient dock slips. So Bruce, what he first started working on was reconfiguring or taking a look at how do you do it and expanded marina for downtown for transient docks. What you see on the screens before you is the option that he came up with. This adds 24 to 27 transient slips to downtown. This was approved by the city council, so we actually have this purchased right now. It's getting delivered, I think, in the next week or so. So we are on track to get this installed before Memorial Day weekend. So this was done. So this is a direct result of that, the downtown shoreline study. But in addition to that, he's starting to work on the preliminary ID of the possible boat launch alternatives. We have reached out to DNR to sort of get is it a hard no or is it a possibility to relocate that boat launch? We're still waiting to hear back from DNR on that. He's also reviewing the current boat launch agreement to see what what the language is in that agreement. Also assembling the base shoreline map and LiDAR survey so we can start developing some concepts for the shoreline adjacent to Lakes of Memorial Park, and working on getting the project working group updated and moving forward. He anticipates over the next 30 days, he'll have shoreline design concepts, alternatives, budget estimates, and pros and cons completed in the next month. Also we'll have the alternative boat launch and parking design concepts, budget estimates, and pros and cons analysis completed for the boat launch. And we'll work with the working group to review what's been presented. And then in June and into July, refinement of the shoreline and boat launch alternatives into the preferred approach and recommendation. He'll further refine those budget estimates and then assemble the boat launch report, the shoreline design packet, the final group meeting, and then present everything back to the board here. So just wanted the EDA to be aware of that we are on track to get this project completed, and just wanted to give everybody an update as to where we are with the project, because it's the priority number one was getting this transient boat slip completed. That's now done, so he's now moving on to the rest of the phase of the project. So that is the update on the shoreline study.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And one of the options he continues to look at is potentially boat launch stays where it is, but parking moves. Is that one of the options?
That is on the table, correct, yeah. So we are, at this point, initial conversation with DNR with one of their agents was, when it was approached, was, were you thinking of moving it? Sort of, it wasn't a definitive hard no, but ultimately this person wasn't the decision maker on it. So we reached out to the decision maker and says, is it a hard no or is there a door open? Bruce is of the mindset that there is the possibility of moving it just based on his past experience with DNR if alternatives are presented. So that's what he leans towards. But we want to make sure that DNR says, yes, if you bring alternatives, we'll have that conversation before we really authorize him to go down that pathway and expend those study dollars on something that is going to not go anywhere with the DNR.
Yeah, because there was some DNR funding involved there, wasn't it? Was that part of the problem, Dan?
There's an agreement that we have currently with the DNR for the operation of the launch that was a result of the funding that we got in early 2000s to have that launch constructed there. So there is a part of that agreement that we have to either get out of and renew or move the launch to a new location and start an agreement over. So there's a lot of kind of questions that are on the table, but a lot of what DNR is gonna ask is, if you move it, where are you gonna move it before they really kind of wanna go down that pathway?
Complicated.
Lots of moving pieces. All right, and development update. I know Abby is not here tonight. Are we punching to a
have-
future meeting, or you have in, okay, in absentia, perfect.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys will all be sick of hearing me drone on about EDA stuff tonight, but this is the last thing I have for tonight. So for city land discussions, we're currently working on a purchase agreement for potential sale of airport business park parcels. It's a multi-tenant user, light industrial office, so we're working to see if that purchase agreement comes through. Also working with Spike and Hools on a phase 2 greenhouse expansion as well. From a new approval standpoint, a couple of smaller projects. Culver's drive-through is going to a double lane. Community Helping Hands is looking at an office and food pantry expansion. From a business expansion standpoint, the Forest Lake Vet Clinic is in. And new business, Mr. Car Wash is going through the approval process right now as well. Active applications, there's Shadow Creek Estates, which is located on the northeast corner of County Road 50 and 202nd and Highway 61. They want to preserve the Shadow Creek riding stable site and then construct 46 townhome units to the north, which will be accessed off of Goodview. There's also the Headwaters Village Concept Plan, which is a potential for an 82-unit market rate apartment building in the Headwaters area. Discussions, we have Hidden Creek, we have north of Headwaters Parkway and east of Fenway, the possibility for some single-family residential in 2023. Forest Road North and Scandia Trail North is a 3-lot light industrial office complex. And then in collaboration with Columbus, Hugo, Lino Lakes, talking about some future development at the southwest corner of the city and some potential regional impact that development would bring from a road network or infrastructure expansion standpoint as well. So a lot of activity happening on the development front in the city as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. Via Abby, much appreciated. In terms of updates, do we have anything from Washington County?
The only thing that Washington County had mentioned was just that National Data Center Site Selector has reached out to multiple sites within the tech corridor, and there's also the possibility of another center that may be reaching out through another agency. So there's been quite a bit of sort of data center movement as well. So he just wanted to be aware that there is still market interest from the technology corridor perspective.
Perfect. And Nan Chamber update?
Well, good morning, good evening, everyone, and great to see you. It's been a bit. We have been busy at the chamber. A couple of things, I'll kind of talk about some things we're wrapping up and then things moving forward. We just had our Shop Local campaign and all of its associated activities with an event here and egg hunt and all of that. And so that's wrapping up, just tying up a few loose ends and figuring out where to put all the eggs. And then we had our Lakes Area Expo at Maranatha, and again, that went well. We figure based on the bags that we gave out and the vendors, we are pretty sure we're pretty close to like 500 people, so not too bad for a comeback year after 3 years, so we were happy about that. Jenny could probably speak more to that. She was there. We're also, as a chamber, we're prepping to wrap up our fiscal year. Our fiscal year ends in June. And we are continuing to see a strong business visit schedule, so we're happy about that. Averaging three to 4 and even sometimes 5 visits a month. So that's good for our ambassadors and get out and meet our local businesses. Let's see, we're also finishing up, we did a perceived business need assessment survey, and so that's been in the works for some months now, and we'll be wrapping that up this week and seeing what kind of a response total we get from that. And then lastly, our Washington County Chamber Coalition, of which we're in partnership with Chris and the CDA, Washington County CDA, we have our Optimize Your Business Summit again this Thursday, and that's going to be in Stillwater. So,
Fabulous.
any questions?
Thanks, Nan. Any questions for Nan?
Right.
Excellent. Thank you. I skipped over city update. Is there anything else from a city perspective we wanted to give update on?
No.
All right. It's the end of our planned agenda for this evening, and we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion, is there a second? Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And we're adjourned, everyone. Thank you.